It's showtime!
Welcome to another episode of Victory Leaders Lounge podcast, where we talk about leadership and successful entrepreneurs and veterans come and tell their story. I hope you enjoy the show. Follow me. Let's go. This podcast is brought to you by Victory Leadership Coaching, your premier leadership training and coaching provider. You can learn more at victoryleadershipcoaching.com, and you can also purchase their book, Why Organizations Should Develop Their Leaders, a pocket guide at amazon.com. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. This is JJ Hardy with Victory Leadership Coaching, here with Chris Pinkowski with Straight Arrow Coaching. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm great, JJ. How are you?
Well, I'm alive. I'm well. I'm vertical, which makes me even better.
There you go.
So today we've decided to talk about ownership. And I could pull up a textbook definition of ownership, but the way I define it is ownership is taking responsibility for everything within your sphere of influence and not passing the blame on to somebody else. What do you think about that, Chris?
I think that's spot on. We as leaders, regardless of if we perform the actual action or not, are responsible for the actions that are done by our people. So ultimately, anyone who's within our sphere of influence, we have to own their outcomes. Good, bad, or indifferent. It still falls on our shoulders.
That's right. And not only that, but there's a reason for that, right? If we're responsible for these people and the work that they're getting done, it's not like we can control their thoughts and emotions and actions all the time. It's more, you want to try to prevent bad things from happening. So taking responsibility for everything within your sphere of influence, even mistakes of an employee of yours, to me, that means, if somebody screws up, what now I need to take that, analyze it, and I want to figure everything out about that mistake so that I can put some measures in place to make sure that another person doesn't make that mistake. Because nobody really likes to make mistakes in the workplace. I don't think.
No.
Nobody shows up to work and says, I'm going to screw up today.
That's right. At least not most people. You've got the occasional person who's looking to get let go from their job, and they're like, I'm just going to screw something up today.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is far and few between.
Yeah. I for the most part, it's tough to work at a job. A lot of people don't like doing it, and they don't like doing it because they're already accountable for somebody else's schedule, for time to somebody else. But for the most part, they need to be doing it. If it's not for you, it's for somebody. So why not make that environment one that's palatable for everybody? And one way to do that is to take ownership of your team. And when somebody screws up, not making them feel like it's a horrible thing, but
Right.
letting them know that stuff happens. And let's talk about that a little bit more and figure out how we can help you be better next time, or how we can make this a process that's trainable and keep that from happening to somebody else.
No, you're absolutely right. And the other thing too about taking ownership is how we present that to the people on our team. There's one case where you can give feedback to somebody, right? And most times feedback is taken personally. The people will say, oh, I screwed up, so the boss is coming down hard on me, as opposed to a process that's called feed forward, which is where you're looking in the future, right? You address the situation, and now you're really focused on a solution for the future. That's one way for leaders to be able to take greater ownership is, hey, look, you and I together, we're going to come up with a solution so that this doesn't happen again. as opposed to me just coming down on you. Because when you just come down on your people for a mistake, you are not taking ownership. You are shifting the blame of that ownership to that individual. It's not to say that negative actions shouldn't be talked about, because they should always be addressed. But the onus going forward needs to be on you, the leader. And when you can make it collaborative and solution-based, forward-facing, then that's the best possible outcome for all parties.
True. And, we talked about servant leadership last time we talked.
Yep.
And if you're really trying to serve people, then, just throwing the hammer at them when they do something wrong, it's not the right way to go. You should be thinking of, the bigger mission. You should be thinking of, because, when we mess up, we try to figure out how we're going to fix that. So when somebody else messes up, if you don't approach it as, oh, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing, you're terrible, horrible, and the whole 9 yards. If you actually have a structured conversation about it, well, what in your opinion went wrong? Well, what would you do differently next time? And then get their feedback, and then kind of go back and forth about it, and then come up with a solution that fits for everybody. Well, then they don't necessarily feel like they did something bad. They just feel like they slipped up, and they know that you're going to be there for them. So this is creating trust. They know you're going to be there for them when things are good, bad, right, wrong, whatever, because of how you approach that situation.
Yeah. And the flip side of the coin too is that taking ownership also means allowing others to own victories, right? We as leaders, when the shit hits the fan, it's on us. When the people on our team, one of our peers succeeds, then the spotlight is on them. You let them own the success.
Yep.
And you're the one who's going to own the failures, right?
Oh man.
I always encourage leaders, don't take the ownership of the successes of your team. It was your team that did that. Even though I say the performance of a team is directly related to a leader, you always got to give that up to the team.
Save that for your evaluation, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the type of stuff. If you do everything right and you are constantly teaching, coaching, and mentoring your team, then the proof, the overall annual evaluation should show that the mistakes were minimal, because they're going to look at other teams too, and they're going to see that they were either the same or worse or whatever or better, and they're going to kind of judge you based off of everyone else, not just you. So yeah, but you're right. There are limits to ownership. And as far as with your employees, especially the execution level ones, they have there's a certain amount of ownership that they have to take for things too, in good ways. So for what you're talking about, recognition, allowing them to do that, because not a lot of people do. They just sit up on their pedestal, and they allow people to say good things about them, and they don't take the time to say, well, actually, that was Joe Snuffy down there. Thank you for acknowledging that my team did something great. But I think we need to go and talk to Joe Snuffy down there, because he did A, B, C, and D, and that's really why this was a success. And
Absolutely.
and acknowledging that. However, ownership in the form of accountability, people do need to be accountable for their actions. So there are limits of ownership. You can't just absorb everything, because we're all people. I mean, not even God takes credit for everything as people do, good, bad, right, or wrong. He gave us free will. So we do make mistakes on our own, sometimes intentionally.
Yeah. And, the accountability piece is very interesting, because whether or not people will admit it or consciously understand it, being held accountable is a good thing. Because if your boss, or if we as leaders aren't watching the metrics, we're not understanding what's going on, then we're actually leaving opportunities on the table to help our people to get better. Holding people accountable not only points out, areas where they're strong, but areas where they're weak and where they're not meeting their performance, expectations. It allows us to address and help them to get better. So the people that like to be held accountable are those ones with a growth mindset that, like, yeah, I want to know where I'm screwing up so that I can turn the dials and get better. But then subconsciously, people also like to know that, all right, I'm holding you accountable, not in a way that I'm going to drop the hammer for you not making your numbers last week, but more so in a way that I'm going to help you to achieve and surpass your numbers going forward.
It's true. So teamwork is when you have an entire team, that the saying goes that you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yep.
Well, you know, most businesses, I mean, there are controls that you can put in to keep that revolving door from happening of hiring and firing and hiring and firing. But at the end of the day, you have to take the lowest common denominator into account when you're doing your training, because if somebody's making a mistake, maybe they don't have the experience or whatever, then chances are somewhere down the line you're not going to have all those high performers all the time.
Right.
So you need to add those things that people are doing into your training program to make sure that you are accounting for those people that may not have the same success level, or maybe I shouldn't say that, but some of their strengths are going to lie in other places. And so you got to focus on where people have opportunities for improvement, and always be looking at that. If you're not always looking for that's why they call it an opportunity, right? Because if you see a weakness somewhere, it is your responsibility to address that and train it, not just with one person, but with everybody.
That's right. And you make a really good point of understanding the lowest common denominator. And I always tell people that that's where your training and your communication should be focused. Because if it's not, then you've got a certain percentage of your population that's not going to understand what's going on. So if you can be focused on communicating in a way that your least skilled person can understand, then the chances of everyone else with more skills, more experience understanding that is only greater. So you've got to kind of appeal to that small segment, knowing that everyone's going to get the picture.
Well, and sometimes people are good at things and they don't even know that they're good at things. It's just
Yeah.
it just comes naturally to them. So if you point out those topics that some other people might be weak in, and you bring it to the attention of those people that are doing well, and you're like, this is how you develop that, then they're going to get even better at those things that they're already strong with, because now it's at the top of mind. They worked on it a little bit, and so those strengths are even stronger.
Yep.
So training is extremely important. I will advocate for that 10 times out of 10. I think that it's important to have a robust training program. It's like a standard operating procedure. It's a living program where you're always making changes to it. The standard operating procedure is a living document because things are changing based off of everything. So you're always making changes to it. I'm always surprised how many people do not have an SOP, though. That just drives me crazy.
More than not, do not have SOPs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But as far as limits of ownership, what other limits are there, do you think?
That's a tough one, because sometimes if someone has done something purposeful and it's someone has sabotaged something, let's just say, you as the leader, yeah, you own that to an extent, but the actions of that person, I think the consequences need to be more severe. So I think in terms of overt actions to make something worse or cause something to go wrong, Yeah, you can argue that you as the leader should have maybe had an inkling that something was going on. But, there are bad actors in the world, and you can't go through life assuming that everyone's a bad actor, and
No.
that's being paranoid. But I think that's where one of the limits is. It's hard to hold someone accountable when someone was malicious, and it, there was nothing that that leader could have done to prevent it.
Well, and I think too that a part of a leader's ownership is that if somebody does sexual harassment, or if somebody is constantly late to work, regardless of what they have going on in their life, because there are reasons that are uncontrollable that will cause a person to have emotional problems and stuff like that, that will cause them being late to work, sometimes just not showing up to work at all. And, though those things are sometimes uncontrollable, we still have to take ownership of that, because at the end of the day, it's about the bigger mission. If your team falls apart because one person is struggling, it's not the military. So, I mean, you can't throw all of your resources at one person. Like when I was on active duty, when you have a business, or if you are working within a business, it's very important that that you'll have to have some hard conversations. And as a leader, you got to take ownership of that, because those hard conversations are not easy either. And let that person say, hey, look, if this behavior continues, or in the case of sexual harassment, you might just have to lay the hammer, kick them out the door,
Right.
because there's zero tolerance for that. You got to make sure that a professional environment is a professional environment. But, constantly being late to work or not showing up at all, there comes a point where you're gonna have to do some definite. You're gonna have to have a structured counseling session and group of sessions to make sure that you are moving them along, or getting them back in, whichever one they happens naturally in their life. That's not your responsibility as a leader in the civilian workforce to make sure that you're taking care of all the mental health concerns of one individual when the whole team is suffering as a result of it. And I hate saying that, because it hurts my soul, because I came from the military. And when one person is down, everybody puts their resources to make sure that person comes back. But in business, I have found that it is not like that. You have to take accountability you have to own it, and do what you got to do.
Yeah, and ownership is not always easy. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it's usually the opposite. And I've had those conversations with business owners who are like, yeah, Joe's been with me for 17 years, and he's causing problems. And you know what? I admire the loyalty,
Mm-hmm.
and I admire giving someone chances to improve. But at the end of the day, you can't sacrifice the entire team for the actions of one person.
Yep.
And the ownership in that case is stepping up to have that ultimate tough conversation for the greater good of your entire team.
Yep. And I'm not saying boot them right out the door.
Right.
At the end of the day, I believe in the teach coach mentor model.
Yep.
You bring them in, you have a conversation. Hey man, I don't know what's going on, but you got to fix this because it's damaging the entire team. Don't wait too long. Give them an opportunity. Discuss the time frame that you're going to give them to improve. If nothing improves by that time, either have that tough chat, then boot them out the door, or give them one more chance, depending on the situation. Some of these smaller businesses can't even handle that because they might only have 3 or 4 employees.
Right.
So, I mean, one person is a quarter of the workforce, and so yeah, it's unfortunate sometimes, but you just got to deal with those things. But it's important to take ownership of the good, making sure that, yeah, as a leader, you will always get credit for things that happen with your team, but making sure that the credit goes where it's due. Own that. Making sure that when somebody does something wrong on the team, makes a mistake, I should say, and you find that opportunity for a training moment, you own that too.
Yeah.
When your boss or another a peer of yours somewhere else in the business comes to you and say, "Hey man, your guy screwed up." Don't say, "Yeah, I know he screwed up." I mean, take ownership of it. Say, "Hey, look, I know we screwed up this one time, but we're working on fixing some processes to make this better for everybody." And don't just say that and then let things happen.
That's
Someone
right.
said, depending on the circumstances, 3 strikes, you're out. Yeah, we discussed that. I mean, you as a business, sometimes you have to take ownership of the bad stuff too and have that difficult conversation. Thank you,
Yeah.
whoever that was. It just says Facebook user on StreamYard, so I don't know who it is until I get off the call. But thank you for making that comment.
Yeah.
But you have to take the good, the bad, and the ugly into account, and you got to do the right thing business wise, because there's a financial and there's a negative impact for everything that goes on if you don't take action. So it's important as leaders to take ownership of everything. Oh, Mike. Okay. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, it's super important. And think about it from the customer experience standpoint, right?
Yes.
Let's say you run a plumbing company or an electrical company, and you get a phone call from Mrs. Jones who says, your guy tracked mud all over my new carpets. From a customer standpoint, they want you to say, Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry. I'll get to the bottom of that. I'm going to make it right for you. As opposed to, and I don't know if you've experienced this, I have, where the business owner is like, oh, damn, Bob, I've told him about wearing muddy boots into someone's house, and it's all his fault. Guess what? Your customer doesn't want to hear that it's Bob's fault. The
Nope.
customer wants to hear that you're going to take ownership and make it right for her.
Yeah, that person just lost credibility.
Exactly.
Well, and not only that, but what you just told that person was, I let Bob continue working for my company, and he's done that before.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's not just from the leadership of the team, but it's also taking ownership in the public eye of what's going on.
Well, that's an interesting, from a service standpoint. I believe it's probably still Mike, because it looks like we have one viewer on right this second. But he said if it's an electrical issue, you could kill someone, and that's so true. That's a bit extreme, but in that
Yeah.
line of work, that stuff happens. If Joe Snuffy goes on, or let's say Bob
Right.
goes onto a work site and he's an electrician, and he forgets to shut down the fuse box when he goes and changes out and he's changing out an outlet, and he dies in somebody's house. Well, what training did you provide that person?
Yeah.
And now that person's going to come home to a dead body in their house. Holy moly, your business is going to be scarred for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Not a fun day.
and of course, poor Bob. But
Poor Bob. Bob should have known better, though.
Bob should have known better. You're an electrician. Actually, I don't know, Mike, because that was probably you who said that. I don't think that was intended to be fun, but we kind of had a little bit of fun with that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it could apply to any kind of business that's working with the public, right?
Yes.
You can get all kinds of complaints, justified or not, and that's the other thing. That I think is also part of a limit of ownership, where if you have people that are complaining just to complain, you have to understand where your limits are. Like, you know what? Yeah, everything was done right, and some people, you can't please all the people all the time, so that becomes another limit.
Yes. And it can get really serious sometimes. And I mean, there are certain jobs, like especially not just your electrical issue, their Facebook user, but in addition to that, if you work at Lowe's or in a warehouse or something like that, where you're around heavy equipment, if you're not following the safety procedures in that company, I have seen it where people get seriously injured or killed on the job. And so from a safety standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, you have to sometimes be a little bit choosy on when you hold the line, but a safety issue, you have to hold the line every single time. And you're not coming down on somebody because of ego at that point. It's more of a, there are certain violations that you cannot tolerate because
Yeah.
it has second and third order effects, and potentially the ultimate outcome could be the worst outcome. And so, you're right. He put on there, it wasn't intended to be funny. It's the truth. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly in leadership. And depending on where you work, the likelihood of something bad happening it's there. But also on the other side of that, there are plenty of good things that happen. Unfortunately, the bad things is what everybody always remembers, it seems like. And that's what can cause, like me right now, I'm rambling on about negative things. And so I need to stop doing that because this is supposed to be an educational conversation and kind of fun too. So
Yeah. Yes, it's supposed to be fun, but the topic of ownership, like we had talked about earlier, really does come into play more so in those negative situations,
yes.
right? Because that's really where the accountability comes in.
Yep.
If we got the same call about Bob where Mrs. Jones called and said, "Your guy Bob showed up at my house. He put booties on across his boots. He was super careful about everything. He was respectful." Then, me as the owner, I'm going to say, "Thank you for letting me know." And I'm going to pass that along to Bob. Bob is one of my best guys. So yeah, the positives need to trickle down to the team.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the negatives, the old saying is the buck stops with me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm a military guy, so I have plenty of those and those aren't the ones that I typically like to focus on. However, I will say that in my training programs, even as a civilian that I've developed, I really do include some of the worst case scenario in that planning. You have to train for this. It's just like any after action review, and I don't know if anybody knows that. That's a military term, but you got to look at what you can sustain in every situation and what you can improve in every situation, and you have to discuss everything not only after some sort of an event, but you have to do that during training. And how do people think training is developed? It's not because some guy had an aha moment and said, "Hey, let's go talk about forklift safety." No, somebody probably got a pallet dropped on them or something.
No, you're right. I mean, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
Yeah, people aren't just sitting around on a random Saturday like, we need to do training about this. It's usually spurred by an event.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, there are certain times where you should incorporate standardized training regularly for a company. And I think it's encouraged that you're developing your employees,
Mhm.
but it's hard when you are in the regular flow of daily operations. And I know we've gotten into training, but in the flow of daily operations, to take time out, extra time out, to talk about something else. Not even the employees want to do that. I
Right.
mean, I'll be honest with you, most times something bad happens and then you take everyone's time to talk about it. Most of the employees walk away upset because now they know they have to catch up on 30 minutes of work.
That's right.
Yeah. So, no more training. I think it's important to know that that there are limits though to ownership. You have to make sure that you are accounting for the good and the bad. And I've said that already, but and that's also why ownership is important, because if you don't address the things that need to be addressed, whether those are good or bad, there's a cost to that. believe it or not. And sometimes the cost is somebody getting hurt. Sometimes the cost is the company losing a ton of money because productivity goes down the drain. If it's a sales team and they're not, I think Donald Miller wrote the book Business Made Simple, and he talks about how sales are the lift that keeps the plane going. Well, if salespeople are out there and they're not making sales, that means the company's not generating revenue and the business could fall apart. So it's important for leaders to take ownership, because that's how everything, when you have leaders that don't take ownership, things fall apart on that team. And then you have to look at the internal processes as well as the person who's head of that team, because if they're not owning the process, owning the successes and failures of everything that happens on that team, then the team's going to fall apart. And ultimately, either they're not going to replace the members of the team. If they figure out it's the head of the team, they're going to replace the head of the team. And they should.
They absolutely should. And, one of the things that I like to say about owner or leadership is that leadership is very similar to being a parent.
Oh yeah.
Right. You're leading by example. You're showing your people what needs to be done. You're demonstrating how you expect people to behave. But also, if you have minor children, right, up until the age of 18, there are things that you as a parent are going to be held responsible for. So you need to look at your leadership in that same way. Like, you know what? Everyone that I lead is basically like a 15-year-old who has their head up their ass, and they're going to do something wrong and it's going to come back on me.
Oh my gosh. And by the way, it's not that they don't, when the kid's under 18, it's not choosy as to what they hold you accountable for. They hold you accountable for everything. Even when that knucklehead decided to go write graffiti on a wall, which my kid's never done that. But how are you supposed to anticipate that happening?
That's right.
Where did they even get the paint?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I could give some real world examples, but I don't want to give my kids away. My kids are wonderful. They don't do anything wrong. What are you talking about?
That's right. My little angels, they would never do that.
But no, I think this is an important topic, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about it today.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we do this every other week. I learn a lot. I've only been in the civilian workforce for 4 years. I've been leading people for a long time, but I learned so much from people like you, Chris, just because I'm having the conversations. I don't know everything.
And same here. I mean, I try to learn something new every day, and it's from the people that I talk to and interact with. I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room, so I'm always looking to turn the dials.
A couple years ago.
Yeah, this was a great conversation.
Oh, sorry. You cut out there for a second.
Yeah, so I was just saying this was a great conversation.
Oh, I agree. So on the topic of learning and growing all the time, that's why we're doing what we're doing. I was told I read, and it was actually a Facebook post a couple years ago, and I have it written on my chalkboard over here because I thought it was so amazing. But there's this saying that I say in my affirmations every morning. If God wakes me up to see another day, I promise to be a better person than I was yesterday. And that's not just for me. It's for him. It's for my kids, and that's for my wife. I mean, it's for everyone around me and my friends as well. But I mean, if you think that you know everything, and this is not for you and me necessarily, this is also for the audience that's listening. If you think you know everything, then you need to take a step back, look in the mirror, tell yourself you're full of crap, and realize there's a lot out there to learn. And it's important to keep learning and growing every day, because how can you help other people in your life or be the best person you can be without taking those opportunities to learn those things and become a better person?
You're right. And, I have a similar mindset, and I know we're getting ready to wrap it up here, but, I look to be 1% better. That's all. 1% better today than I was yesterday.
Yep.
That's not a tough lift, right?
No.
1% isn't that difficult. But over time, being consistent with it, your growth just continues and it's exponential.
Yeah, and I believe that the best way to do that is through serving others.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was great. I look forward to our chat. It's a shame we have to do it every couple of weeks because I enjoy it every time we do it. But
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, we'll. I don't know if it's going to be the same way, but I hope it's posted up so that people can see this ahead of time again. That was great. StreamYard does that. So hopefully that does. And people will know this is coming ahead of time so that we can get a bigger audience. But if you see this post, and I know you will, because you're probably hearing me say this, but down here in the comments, we don't want this conversation to end with us. Comment on this live stream, this post, whatever you want to call it, and keep the conversation going. And don't just wait for us to respond to other people too. That's what we're doing this for. We're not doing this for us. We're doing this for everybody. So
absolutely. And that's part of the journey here, right? This is our third show, and we've learned something new, I think, in each of the shows about how to do this better. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah. StreamYard is technology is in every program you use. It's just different.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you. Thank you everybody who's listening, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, JJ. Have an awesome weekend. See everybody. Lead on.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Victory Leaders Lounge. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you enjoy these episodes, tune in and watch every week. I air a new episode every Wednesday. And if this information resonates with you, make sure you subscribe to my podcast. If you see it on my YouTube channel, subscribe to it there. But please make sure that you're raising awareness for leadership, because all problems can be solved with great leadership. On that note, I have leadership training for new managers. People promote their great employees to supervisors and managers without providing them with extra training. Don't do that to your people. Reach out to me if you want to hear more about that training. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.